I never thought a single piece of jewelry could encapsulate the entire trajectory of my marriage. But as I sit here now, looking out over the balcony of my new, peaceful apartment, I realize that the vintage diamond ring was exactly that, a shiny, multifaceted lie. For 5 long, agonizing years, that ring sat on my left hand, heavy with the weight of unfulfilled promises and silent suffering. It was a beautiful trap, set by a woman who had mastered the art of polite cruelty, and maintained by a man who was too cowardly to ever stand up to her. This is the story of how that ring, and the toxic family it came from, finally gave me the push I needed to reclaim my life, and how a $20 piece of copper became the instrument of my ultimate, spectacular revenge. To truly understand the magnitude of what happened, you have to understand the beginning. When I first met my husband, let's call him David, he seemed like the answer to every prayer I hadn't even realized I was praying. He was charming, attentive, and seemingly devoted to me. We met at a quaint coffee shop downtown, the kind of serendipitous encounter that feels scripted by a romantic comedy writer. For the first year, we were in our own little bubble. But then, the bubble popped. I was introduced to his mother, Beatrice. Beatrice was a woman who commanded the very air in any room she entered. She was old money, or at least she desperately projected the illusion of it, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair, her cashmere twinsets, and a smile that never quite reached her cold, assessing blue eyes. From the very first dinner at her sprawling, immaculate suburban estate, I knew she had weighed me on some invisible scale and found me profoundly wanting. I didn't come from a wealthy family. My parents were hardworking teachers, a fact Beatrice found quaintly tragic. She would introduce me to her country club friends with a sigh, saying, "This is David's lovely girlfriend." Her parents are in public education, bless their hearts. It was the kind of southern fried passive aggression that leaves you bleeding before you even realize you've been cut. Despite Beatrice's subtle campaign of terror, David proposed. I said yes, blinded by love and the naive belief that once we were married, we would be our own family unit. I thought David would draw a line in the sand. I was so incredibly wrong. The wedding planning was a nightmare orchestrated by Beatrice. She hijacked every decision, from the floral arrangements to the catering menu, always framing it as a favor to save my financially constrained family from the burden. David, whenever I tried to express my frustration, would simply rub his temples and say, "Just let her have this, honey. It's easier than fighting with her. You know how she gets." That phrase, "you know how she gets," became the defining mantra of our marriage. It was his universal excuse for refusing to protect me. Then came the ring. It happened during a stiff, formal dinner at Beatrice's house about 2 months before the wedding. She called for silence, stood up, and produced a faded velvet box. Inside was a breathtaking vintage diamond ring. It was an Edwardian piece, featuring a stunning European-cut center stone surrounded by an intricate filigree setting that looked like spun sugar made of platinum. It sparkled with an almost aggressive brilliance under the chandelier light. "This," Beatrice announced, her voice echoing in the silent dining room, "has been in our family for 4 generations. It is traditionally given to the woman who will carry the family legacy forward. David, I want you to place this on her finger. I had hoped to save it, but, well, traditions must be honored, even in unconventional circumstances." Even as she gave me the most valuable thing I had ever touched, she couldn't resist a dig. Unconventional circumstances. Because I wasn't the rich debutante she had envisioned for her eldest son. David beamed, oblivious to the insult, and slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. I wept, thinking that perhaps, finally, this was her way of accepting me. I thought the ring was a peace offering. I didn't realize it was a collar. Over the next 5 years, that ring became a tool of Beatrice's emotional abuse. If I dared to disagree with her on anything, from where we spent Thanksgiving to how I chose to decorate my own living room, she would glance pointedly at my left hand and sigh. "I suppose one cannot expect someone of your background to appreciate the finer things, despite the family treasures we entrust to you." The emotional abuse was insidious. It wasn't screaming matches, it was death by 1,000 paper cuts. It was the time she, accidentally, shrank my favorite silk blouse in her laundry because she insisted my detergent wasn't good enough. It was the time I had a devastating early miscarriage, and as I sat weeping on my sofa, she patted my knee and said, "Perhaps it's for the best, dear. The family lineage requires a certain, robust constitution. You're so fragile." I looked to David, begging him with my eyes to throw her out of our house. He just stared at the floor, muttered something about needing a glass of water, and walked out of the room. He left me alone with the monster. That was the day a cold, hard knot formed in my chest. That was the day my love for him began to curdle into resentment. The breaking point, however, arrived in the form of David's younger brother, Julian. Julian was the golden child. While David was merely the eldest and expected to be responsible, Julian was the charming rogue, the favorite, the one who could do absolutely no wrong in Beatrice's eyes. Julian had spent his 20s bouncing between expensive universities and finding himself in Europe on his parents' dime. And then, he brought home Serena. Serena was Beatrice's ultimate fantasy realized. She was the daughter of a prominent corporate lawyer, possessed a degree in art history she had never used, and walked with the unearned confidence of someone who has never been told no in her entire life. She was perfectly manicured, perpetually draped in designer labels, and possessed a sneering condescension that made Beatrice look like an amateur. From the moment Serena strutted into the family dynamic, I was relegated from disappointing daughter-in-law to invisible servant. Serena and I clashed instantly. She would make offhand comments about my sensible shoes or my mid-range car, laughing a high, tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "I just don't know how you can stand driving that little thing," she told me once at a family barbecue, sipping a mimosa. I'd feel so pedestrian, and Beatrice, overhearing, simply smiled and added, "Well, Serena darling, we all have to live within our means. Not everyone is accustomed to luxury." A few months after Serena's arrival, Julian announced their engagement. The family was ecstatic. Beatrice threw a lavish, impromptu celebration at her estate. Champagne flowed, toasts were made, and I sat quietly in the corner, twisting the vintage diamond ring on my finger, feeling completely alienated. That was when I noticed Beatrice and Serena huddled together, glancing in my direction. Serena's eyes were fixed entirely on my left hand. A sinking feeling pooled in my stomach. 3 days later, the trap snapped shut. David and I were summoned to Beatrice's house for a family meeting. When we arrived, Beatrice was seated in her imposing wingback chair in the study, a pot of Earl Grey tea steaming on the table beside her. She didn't offer us any. "Sit down," she commanded. We obeyed. David looked terrified, as he always did when his mother summoned him. I sat up straight, bracing myself. Beatrice took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. "David." "And you," she said, nodding vaguely in my direction. "We need to discuss the ring." My hand instinctively moved to cover my left ring finger. "What about it?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady despite the racing of my heart. "Julian and Serena are getting married," Beatrice stated, as if this were news. "Serena is a woman of exceptional pedigree. She will be the cornerstone of this family's social standing for the next generation. As such, it is only fitting that she wear the family heirloom." I stared at her, genuinely stunned. "Are you asking me for my wedding ring?" "I am not asking," Beatrice corrected, her voice dropping to a glacial chill. "I am telling you. That ring is a family treasure. It belongs on the finger of a more sophisticated woman, a woman who truly represents our family's caliber. It is entirely wasted on you. You will return it to me so Julian can present it to Serena." I turned to David, my husband, the man who had sworn before God and our families to love, honor, and protect me. "David," I whispered, "are you hearing this?" David swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He couldn't even look me in the eye. He looked at a spot on the wall just above my head. "Well, honey, I mean, it is a family heirloom. And Mom makes a good point about Julian and Serena's social obligations. We could always go to the mall and pick you out something nice. A modern ring. Something more. You." The silence in the room was deafening. I felt as though the floor had suddenly dropped out from beneath me, plunging me into an icy, lightless ocean. In that one moment, 5 years of built-up excuses, compromises, and silent tears crystallized into absolute clarity. He was never going to choose me, he was never going to protect me. I was completely alone. But from that profound loneliness, a tiny, glowing ember of pure, white-hot rage ignited in my soul. "I see," I said softly. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, the time for tears had passed. "I expect it returned to me by Friday," Beatrice said, looking incredibly smug, mistaking my shock for submission. "Julian intends to formally propose with it at their engagement gala this weekend. Do ensure it is cleaned before you hand it over. I wouldn't want Serena catching anything." "Of course," I replied, standing up. "I'll have it ready for you." I walked out of the house, leaving David scrambling to catch up. He babbled the whole way home, trying to justify his cowardice, promising we would find a beautiful new ring, saying I was being so mature about the whole thing. I just nodded, staring out the passenger window, the engine of my mind roaring to life. Legally, the ring was mine. I had consulted a divorce attorney a year prior during a particularly bad rough patch, though I hadn't gone through with it. I remembered her telling me clearly, "A gifted engagement ring, once the marriage has taken place, is the sole property of the recipient. It is a completed gift." Beatrice had absolutely no legal claim to it, and neither did David. But simply saying no and keeping it wasn't enough. Saying no would lead to a dragged-out messy fight. Beatrice would play the victim, David would whine endlessly, and I would be painted as the greedy, lower-class thief. No, I needed something cleaner. I needed something that would burn Beatrice's pristine reputation to the ground and leave her humiliated in front of the exact high society crowd she valued more than her own soul. The next morning, while David was at work, I called in sick. I opened my jewelry box, took out the vintage ring, and placed it safely in a hidden compartment of my purse. Then, I drove to the seedy, industrial side of the city, far away from Beatrice's manicured suburbs. I found a hole-in-the-wall costume jewelry manufacturer that I had noticed years ago when buying props for a school play. The owner was a grizzled man named Sal, who smelled of cigars and metal polish. I walked in, laid a crisp $100 bill on his counter, and showed him several high-resolution photos of the ring I had taken the night before. "I need a replica of this," I told him, "and I need it by Thursday." Sal squinted at the photos, then at me. "Lady, to make a mold and cast that in silver with decent cubic zirconia by Thursday is gonna cost you a hell of a lot more than $100. "I don't want silver," I corrected, a cold smile touching my lips. "I want it made of the cheapest copper you have. And I don't want cubic zirconia. I want cheap, faceted glass. I want it to look exactly like this ring from a distance of 2 feet, but I want the metal to be raw, reactive copper, perhaps plated with a razor-thin layer of rhodium that will wear off within hours of contact with human sweat and skin oils." "Can you do that?" Sal looked at me for a long moment, a slow grin spreading across his face. He recognized a woman on a mission of vengeance. "Lady, I can make you a ring that'll turn a finger green faster than a rotten leprechaun. $20 for the materials and rush job. Keep the change." By Thursday afternoon, I had the replica in my hand. Sal was an artist. To the untrained eye or a quick, arrogant glance, it looked identical to the heirloom. But it was incredibly light, the diamond felt like plastic, and underneath a microscopic layer of shiny plating, it was pure, unadulterated, reactive copper. I placed it in the faded velvet box Beatrice had given me 5 years ago. That evening, I packed. I waited until David fell asleep. He was a heavy sleeper, untroubled by the heavy conscience he lacked. I moved silently through our house like a ghost, packing only what was truly mine. My clothes, my books, my documents. I left everything we had bought together. I left the expensive espresso machine Beatrice had bought us so we wouldn't serve her diner water. I left the ugly vases Serena had sneered at. By 3 a.m., my car was fully packed and parked down the street. Friday morning arrived. David was nervously pacing the kitchen, sipping coffee. "So, you have the ring?" he asked, looking everywhere but at me. "I have it," I said, my voice trembling perfectly. I conjured up a tear, letting it spill over my eyelashes and slide down my cheek. I pulled the faded velvet box from my pocket and set it on the granite counter. David looked relieved. He reached out and awkwardly patted my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, babe. Mom will be thrilled. I'll take it to her on my way to work. No, I sniffled, wiping away the fake tear. I want to give it to her myself. I want her to know. I want her to know that I understand my place. David practically melted with relief. Wow, that is so big of you, I knew you'd understand. An hour later, I was standing in Beatrice's imposing foyer. She swept down the grand staircase, already dressed for some charity luncheon, eyeing me like a cockroach that had wandered onto her marble floor. Well, she demanded, extending her hand. I opened my purse, took out the velvet box, and held it tightly. I looked at her, forcing another tear to well up in my eyes. Here it is, Beatrice, just as you asked. I handed the box over. She snatched it from my hand, popping it open. She barely glanced at the ring, her eyes alight with the triumph of defeating me. To her, the ring was just a symbol of her power. She didn't possess the jeweler's eye to spot the cheap glass in the dim lighting of the foyer. She snapped the box shut. Good, she said coldly. I'm glad you finally realized this was inevitable. You may see yourself out. Enjoy the party tomorrow night, I said softly. We will, she sneered. It's an exclusive guest list, of course. David will be attending. I suggested you stay home. You always look so uncomfortable in formal wear anyway. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I whispered to myself as I turned and walked out the door. I didn't go back to the house I shared with David. I drove straight to a highly reputable gemologist downtown. I handed him the real vintage diamond ring. He examined it under his loupe, whistling softly. A magnificent European cut. VVS 1 Clarity, E-Color. The platinum setting is a masterpiece. This is easily worth $40,000. I want to sell it, I told him. Today. Because I had the original appraisal papers, which I had wisely kept in my personal safe, and proof of identity, the transaction was swift. By Friday afternoon, a very large sum of money was wired into a brand new, solo bank account I had opened 3 days prior. My escape fund was secure. Now, I had to ensure my final act went off without a hitch. I checked into a nice hotel on the other side of the city, poured myself a glass of expensive wine, and waited for Saturday night, the night of the grand engagement gala. I didn't actually attend the party. I didn't need to. I had an inside source. My best friend, Sarah, whose husband was tangentially connected to Julian's business circle, had been invited. Sarah knew everything. She was my eyes and ears, armed with a fully charged smartphone and instructions to text me every single detail. The gala was held at the most exclusive country club in the county. According to Sarah's texts, Beatrice had spared no expense. There were ice sculptures, a string quartet, and enough caviar to choke a whale. The creme de la creme of the city's high society was there. Judges, local politicians, old money socialites. It was Beatrice's kingdom and she was holding court. At 9:00 p.m., my phone buzzed. Sarah, it's happening. Julian just grabbed the microphone. He's calling Serena up to the front. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed, my heart pounding a steady, exhilarating rhythm. Sarah's texts came in a flurry. He's doing the whole speech. How she completes him, blah blah. Beatrice is practically vibrating with smugness in the front row. David looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. Julian just pulled out the velvet box. He's opening it. She said yes. He's putting it on her finger. There was a pause, 2 minutes. 5 minutes, the anticipation was agonizing. I took a sip of wine. I knew the timeline. Serena, being Serena, wouldn't just quietly accept the ring. She would parade it around. She would show it to every single person in that room. She would thrust her hand into the face of every wealthy woman there to establish dominance. And as she did, the heat of the crowded ballroom, the sweat of her own hand, and the constant touching would rapidly eat away at Sal's incredibly fragile rhodium plating, exposing the raw, reactive copper beneath. At 9:45 p.m., my phone started ringing. It wasn't a text, it was a FaceTime call from Sarah. I answered immediately. Sarah was hiding in a bathroom stall, holding her hand over her mouth to stifle her hysterical laughter. "You are a terrifying genius," she choked out. "You have to see this, I recorded the whole meltdown." She sent the video file. I opened it, my hands shaking with anticipation. The video started in the main ballroom. The camera was zoomed in on Serena, who was holding court among a group of older socialites. Beatrice was standing right beside her, beaming. Serena was holding her left hand up, waving it around as she talked, letting the chandelier light hit the ring. But something was wrong. A woman in a sequin dress, Mrs. Wentworth, the wife of a prominent judge, leaned in to admire the ring. She squinted. "Oh, Serena, darling. The stone is very unique." Serena laughed her glass-breaking laugh. "It's a vintage family heirloom, Mrs. Wentworth. Flawless." "Yes, well," Mrs. Wentworth murmured, adjusting her glasses. "And is the band supposed to be that color?" The camera zoomed in closer. Even through the grainy phone video, I could see it. The band, which had been bright silver when Julian placed it on her finger, was now a dull, muddy brown. But worse, much, much worse, was Serena's finger. From the base of her knuckle to the middle joint, Serena's skin had turned a bright, toxic, neon green. It wasn't a subtle discoloration. It looked like she had dipped her finger in radioactive sludge. The copper had reacted violently with her skin oils and the expensive hand cream she undoubtedly used. Serena looked down at her hand. Her jaw dropped. She let out a shriek that cut through the string quartet's music like a chainsaw. "What is this? What is on my hand?" Beatrice whipped her head around, her smile vanishing. She grabbed Serena's hand. "What did you spill on yourself, Serena?" "I didn't spill anything," Serena shrieked, frantically trying to wipe the green stain off on her $1,000 silk dress, which only resulted in smearing green oxidation all over the white fabric. "It's the ring is doing it." The crowd around them had gone dead silent. The murmurs began, wealthy, judgmental whispers rippling through the ballroom. "Is that copper?" Someone whispered loudly. "Good heavens, a green finger." Like a prize from a bubblegum machine. Beatrice's face turned the color of a bruised plum. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, her carefully cultivated accent slipping into something much harsher. "That ring is a priceless platinum antique. It has been in the family for a century." But the damage was done. Serena was hyperventilating, struggling to pull the ring off her swollen, sweaty finger. When she finally yanked it free, the full extent of the green stain was visible to everyone. She threw the ring onto a cocktail table, where it landed with a dull, pathetic clink that sounded nothing like heavy platinum. "This is where the universe decided to bless me with perfect, unadulterated luck." Stepping forward from the crowd was Mr. Sterling, the owner of the most prestigious luxury jewelry boutique in the city. Beatrice had been trying to get him to attend her parties for years. "May I?" Mr. Sterling asked calmly, stepping up to the cocktail table. Beatrice looked like she was going to faint, but she nodded stiffly. Mr. Sterling pulled a jeweler's loop from his breast pocket, because of course a man like that carries one to parties, and screwed it into his eye. He picked up the ring with the tips of his fingers, holding it up to the light. The entire ballroom held its breath. He lowered the ring, popped the loop out of his eye, and looked directly at Beatrice. "Beatrice, my dear," he said, his voice carrying perfectly in the silent room. "I don't know who appraised your family heirlooms, but I highly suggest you fire them. The stone is faceted glass. And the band is cheap, low-grade copper with a rapidly degrading silver wash. This piece of jewelry is worth, at most, $20. Pandemonium. Serena burst into loud, ugly, hysterical sobs, screaming at Julian that his family was a bunch of broke, lying frauds. Julian was stammering, looking utterly bewildered. David, true to form, had actually backed away into the shadows of a potted palm tree, trying to become invisible. But Beatrice, oh Beatrice, the video caught her face perfectly. The facade completely crumbled. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch was publicly exposed as a fraud who had gifted her beloved future daughter-in-law a crackerjack toy. The whispers of the crowd turned into outright, amused gossiping. The social ruin she had always feared was happening in real time, in her own ballroom. "David!" Beatrice suddenly shrieked, her voice cracking. "David, where is she? Where is your wife?" The video ended there. I sat back on the hotel bed, tears streaming down my face. But this time, they were tears of pure, unbridled laughter. The sheer catharsis of that moment washed over me, cleansing away 5 years of anxiety, belittlement, and pain. I had weaponized her own snobbery against her. She was so blinded by her desire to humiliate me and elevate Serena that she never bothered to actually inspect the ring. She just assumed I was a defeated, obedient little mouse. My phone started blowing up. Calls from David, texts from David, calls from Beatrice. I watched the screen light up with their frantic, desperate attempts to reach me. David's texts were a masterclass in panic. Where are you? Mom is having a panic attack. What did you do to the ring? Serena is threatening to leave Julian. Please pick up. We need to fix this. Where is your stuff? I just got home and your closet is empty. I picked up my phone, blocked Beatrice's number entirely, and typed one final message to my soon-to-be ex-husband. The real ring is legally mine. I sold it yesterday. The money will cover my moving expenses and the divorce lawyer you'll be hearing from on Monday. Tell your mother I said it belongs on the finger of a more sophisticated woman, but unfortunately, I couldn't find one in your family. Have a nice life, David. I hit send. Then, I blocked his number too. I turned the phone off, tossed it onto the nightstand, and walked out